Okay, shall we start?
Yes.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name's Yvonne Billimore. I'm the Associate Programme Curator at Frame, Contemporary Art Finland, and the co-editor of this publication, Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 2, with Jussi Koitela. And just to start with, I'm going to do some basic introductions and a little bit of housekeeping. So this is the second in a series of events being held between September and October 2020 to celebrate the launch of Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 2. This is the second in a series of readers published by Frame Contemporary Art Finland and Archive Books, which accompany Frame's 5-year public programme, Rehearsing Hospitalities. In this event, we're going to host some words and responses and readings from contributor Annette Dekker, and also from artists Akbar Mehta and Susanna Ånäs from the Central Park Archives project by MCult, who are one of this year's Rehearsing Hospitalities programme partners alongside Museum of Impossible Forms. In the first part of this event today, they are going to share readings on and of Annette's text, Archival Absurdity, or A Walk in the Park. And the second part of their conversation is maybe more of an organic dialogue. Then finally, the event closes, or doesn't close, it sort of continues with some questions and responses from the audience. And the way to do this is to post any comments or questions that you have into the YouTube comment section. I think in order to do this, you have to have either a Gmail account or sign in to YouTube, but it's very simple. It's just a couple of little clicks. So please do that, because we would love to hear your comments. And then, just to also note, you can see the full schedule with all the timings in the event description on YouTube. Just a little bit about technicalities. This event is being recorded today, and artist Iona Rosen is with us, who's doing some captioning. We also have Iris from Frame Contemporary Art Finland behind the scenes, the screens. And again, just a further kind of technical note, that this event has some guidelines for safer and more inclusive participation. These have been shared with the speakers in advance, and they are visible in the YouTube description for audiences as well. So a little bit of the housekeeping. We wanted to just maybe share some words on the publication, Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion 2, which I have a copy of here. So Rehearsing Hospitality Companion series accompanies Frame's 5-year public programme, Rehearsing Hospitalities. The first year of the programme and the edition focused on questioning how to become more hospitable to a diversity of knowledges. This year we've turned to access to question multiple approaches, understandings and experiences of access and barriers to access. These include physical, social, environmental, epistemological. And this is what this publication focuses on this year. We also used the publication this year as a site for gathering, as a place for meeting and coming together and for hosting different guests this is something that runs through the series, but is perhaps yes, become more important in the sets of circumstances that we've been living through the last months. And over to Jussi, who is the co-editor of the publication, and I believe wants to say a couple of words too.
Yes, hello from my behalf too. I'm Jussi Koitela, head of program at Frame. As Yvonne was explaining, the publication now is made in the kind of special situation. So we wanted to, more than ever, we need to consciously reconsider diverse forms of hospitalities and ways of being together. With this publication, we want to look beyond normative and institutionalized understanding of access. How can arts organizations and institutions treat access not as a general or universal policy, but instead understand access needs as coming from plural and decentralized ways of knowing and experiencing the world. We have contributions from Camille Auer, Yvonne Billimore, Annette Dekker, Dennis Ferreira de Silva, Amy Hamrae, Hanna Helander, me, Ali Akbar Mehta, Astrida Naimansis, Marietta Radomska, Mariana Savallampi, Laura Soissalo-Soininen, Minna Tarkka, and Touko Vahtera. So it's quite a bunch of people. Publication is available as an open access PDF and in hard copy. In addition, we will be releasing ebook and audio book versions later in the autumn. Information and links how to get your copy are in the event description in the YouTube. Yes. And now I wanted to introduce the speakers of this event. Annette Dekker is assistant professor in media studies, archival and information studies at the University of Amsterdam and visiting professor and co-director in the Center for Study of Networked Image at London South Bank University. Annette Dekker's contribution, Archival Absurdity or Walk in the Park, in the book, I mean contribution in the book, takes us on a journey from Annette's childhood garden with sweet berry bushes to her new allotment garden, and further onwards to think with a speculative project based in Helsinki Central Park. This Allotment Archives invites us to consider different approaches for commons archiving as a collection of anecdotes, speculative and lived. Annette and her characters rehearse stories of cultivating collective and accessible knowledges without hierarchy and beyond regime of expert. Annette has been collaborating with digital culture and collaborative art agency MCult, and in the process of developing her text was dialogue with Central Park Archives producers and artists. Central Park Archives is a project exploring practices of collaborate archiving together with communities and residents in Maunula area, Helsinki. This long-term project is inaugurated in 2020 as a local and online residency with artists Susanna Ånäs and Ali Akbar Mehta, both whose artistic practice deal with conceptual extensions of archives and commons. The project is co-produced by Ida Nissinen, Kalle Kuisma and Minna Tarkka from Digital Culture and Collaborative Agency MCult and local collaborators. So they will later comment Annette's reading. And then now we can go to the reading by Annette. Annette, you are welcome to start.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jussi and Yvonne, both of you, as well as Frame, of course, for inviting me to contribute an essay in the book. Perhaps a little bit of contextualization. Why am I asked, and then what am I doing here? Is that I was in Helsinki about a year and a half ago now, on a residency, a fellowship invited by KUVA, University of the Arts in Helsinki, and Sastamon Foundation. And that's where I spent, I think, was it now? Oh, time is just so weird these days, but I think 3 or 4 months in Helsinki. And it was springtime, so it was a lovely time that you could see everything starting to grow. And that's also where I learned more about MCult and their projects. And I talked with Ali, Susanna, and Minna over the period of time when I was there, but also afterwards, as I was really interested in their projects. I was actually in Helsinki for something else, but I think in some ways what I'm going to be reading to you now very much relates, actually. I was there for a research period in which I wanted to look into 2 things. On the one hand, I wanted to look into what online curation meant. And well, that's becoming at the high point in a way now, I would say. But on the other hand, I was also very interested in digital preservation. And that's a continuing research trend and interest of me. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how actually digital preservation particularly is not very sustainable anymore. And one of the things that I'm looking into is how networks of care, as I refer to, can help actually to make digital preservation more resilient. A network of care, I won't go into that at all, but shortly, it is a sort of community effort in which you start taking care of a certain project or certain work. Now, and I think that kind of relates to my invitation in a way for Rehearsing Hospitalities and to come up with an article. And while I was writing the article, it was the start of also COVID-19. And it was a very weird experience and still is in many ways. And so I kind of departed from the idea in a way of the networks of care and looked much more closely to where am I now, what am I doing, and how am I finding myself in this situation and finding my own ways. And one of the inspirations again was the talks with Minna, Ali, and Susanna about their project, as Jussi also mentioned just now. One of the aims was also to come to Helsinki and to explore more in depth with them as well on their project and what was going on. And of course, the situation didn't allow that to happen. So I started speculating. What could it be? What could it have been? You know, to be there and to immerse myself again in this lovely environment. At the time, I was also reading a booklet, an artist book in a way, which I'll just show you now. Finally, we just keep showing books here online, paper books, which I really like. Yeah, you probably won't be able to read it, but it doesn't really matter. It's in Dutch anyway, so yeah. And it's quite a boring sort of picture on it in a way. Anyway, it's an artist book, as I said, by Annet Dekker. He's a Dutch designer, photographer. And a couple of years ago, in 2010, actually 10 years ago now, she graduated, and one of her graduation project was this booklet, an encyclopedia of an allotment garden. And that's what you can actually see here on the book is indeed a sort of allotment garden thingy. And one of those lots is hers. Parcel number 235. So I took her book as an inspiration indeed to rethink indeed what does it actually mean to archive. And so I will read a few excerpts indeed of the short article, the essay that I wrote. And then, yeah, I hope to hear from Ali and Susanna more about what actually did I do. So starting off, Annet Dekker is a keen observer with a great sense of curiosity and an idiosyncratic way of looking at nature. She studies and extracts information about animal and plant life from literature and science. She collects and prepares leaves, small critters, and flowers to document, delineate, and categorize. And finally, she makes her findings known to the world in a publication, as I just showed. Unlike many other taxonomic works, though, she doesn't focus on the conventional aspects of plant and animal life, such as garden plants, mammals, or insects. Instead, she tries to provide a complete visual overview of a specific location, in this case, her allotment garden number 235. She looks for all kinds of different patterns and phenomena, and depending on the situation, she creates alternative categories to classify her observations. And I just briefly wanted to show you a few examples. So let me see if that goes anywhere. So this is her sort of allotment garden. As you can see, she just places it on a grid. And in that grid, she kind of makes all these kind of, significant details in a way. So here is the sort of things that she sees. It's the leaves, it's leaves and ants, all sorts of weird stuff. And those species can also be dead leaves. It's one of her things as well, is that how to categorize this life around me. And so she also looks at the details. So dead leaves for her are just as important as anything else, basically. Okay, I've got two more that I wanted to show. So yeah, this is also a really nice one. I thought how she looks from her garden into the sky and sees all these birds flying, and they become a sort of silhouettes, and also leaves that have been eaten by all kinds of bugs. I really like that one. And then the final one, which I completely dislike, but then again, you know, you start to look closer and you actually see, well, this is actually more interesting. It's the group behavior of snails. So she found a group of snails and saw how they were like moving. And so she made all kinds of drawings about it. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you a few examples of what I think is a fantastic book and her way of looking at things. So Anne Gein's approach is very much akin in a way to a scientific biologist, but her science is based purely on visual similarities, patterns, and contrasts. At times it seems completely idiotic, absurd, and the conclusions are also very insightful though, and very surprising. Delving into her world shows the results of the meticulousness and fastidiousness of human intervention in nature. And that can be perceived in the microcosm of the allotment. Albeit though that the human influence is obscurely represented through animals, plants, behaviors, forms, colors, patterns, traces, and all kinds of other topological features. Her depiction of this world presents a space where all kinds of species live, yet, and befitting the encyclopedic method, seemingly function independently of each other. So while she is interested in objectivity and categorization, she primarily explores and shows the different meanings an image can convey. As she mentioned herself, and I'm quoting her, "You can move with context and information. I see photography mainly as an information carrier with which different stories can be told." End quote. Photography in this sense I see as an archive. In addition to being a documentation device, the camera and the apparatus, the framing, the camera position, the way the light enters the aperture is an archival medium. So in her observations and consequent encyclopedia efforts, Gein wants to invert perception. She shows that it's possible to capture a world in images, in texts or sounds. But she asks, what does such a record actually represent? In other words, while using universal strategies of categorization and standardization, she also denies the existence of objectivity, or at least she starts questioning it. So while her focus on and ways also of classifying seem absurd. How important is it to know about the behavior and the impact of the different intensities of sun rays on earthworms, or the group behavior that I just showed of these various species of snails? Who really wants to know? However, though, her idiotic system, in a way, transcends the logic and opens up the imagination. It confronts readers with their own thinking and proposes other visions and ways of looking at the world. It also relates to the art of noticing, which, as explained by anthropologist Annet Dekker, means that rather than merely looking and seeing, sniffing and smelling, touching and feeling, or listening and hearing, the art of noticing implies a subtle shift. To notice is also to realize there is a change, that the past is different from the present. It also connects to slow science, which is described by philosopher Isabel Stengers as the demanding operation that would reclaim the art of dealing with and learning from what scientists too often consider messy. That is, what escapes the general, the so-called objective categories. So I started wondering, thinking about her practice and all these different theories around it, that I connected to them. What happens when using these ideas of noticing and slow science as models to create and foster ecologies or archives in which humans and non-human alike can thrive? And one approach I briefly and speculatively write about is the tension and cooperation between two perspectives that underlie the creation and development of many community archives. And it's what I called the approach of an artist activist and a federative archivist. So I guess here I want to stop and see if we can indeed start a discussion.
Hi, Annette.
Great, thank you. Yes, Ali, if you want to go on, just go on, yeah.
Okay. No, I just wanted to thank Annette for this lovely reading. And in fact, to also say that Susanna and I, in the afternoon, we were also talking about this who's who, and can the lines between the artist, archivist and the federative archivist be sharply drawn, and how blurred are they, and can they even be clearly delineated in today's time in the ways in which we work? So also to just kind of think about it in this context of archival absurdity that you're talking about. And it also made me think about a very Brechtian perspective when Brecht is talking about the theater of the absurd, and to maybe link it to the absurdity of the archive that we are now talking about, and how the absurd is, in a way, the absurdity of not following a certain predefined format of scientific methodology, and trying to, at least in Anne Jean's work, you're talking about a certain kind of pattern recognition that is purely visual, as opposed to a deeper layer of pattern recognition, which is part of an empirical scientific process. And just thinking about a lot of these kind of things. So yeah, maybe that is one thing that we can talk further about, this idea of the absurd.
Maybe I could also pick up on that. Thank you very much. And this is a lovely text, and we are only halfway through. I got carried away about the idea of classification and close observation, and sort of maybe got sidetracked into the thinking about the word intelligence as a means of saying, of meaning espionage, that recording, observing meticulously, trying to find the patterns, trying to find the anomalies, and then from that to the notion of artificial intelligence, which is in fact dealing with these observations, like massive observations, and trying to learn like Angin, trying to see whether there is a pattern and then learning from that to look for those patterns. And somehow in this idea of this organic and maybe live intelligence is underlying in the these patterns of archiving these days. So in a way, I'm just throwing in the air some words to to mix our thoughts. So giving you which one wants to go on from here?
Shall I maybe quickly respond?
Oh, that would be nice.
God. These are two really hard areas, of course, and I'm really happy that you picked up on them. However, though, I'm not quite sure if I'm the right person to really go in depth in these subjects. However, though, I think, yeah, both the absurdity of Brecht and what the absurdity can mean and can bring us actually as well, kind of in a way strangely links also in a way to what you said, Susanna, also about the intelligence and the patterns of archiving in all the big data and AI that's used to extract information from it, and why that is the real absurd, I would say. But yeah, absurdity for me has also a really positive quality in which you can go from the imagination to find out other things, and that is, to me, was always really problematic with standardization. It kind of limits your imagination. Huh? It kind of extracts all the information, and it just brings a huge contextual information into this perhaps one word or one frame, one image, and or a detail of an image. And that's where it makes huge speculations about, without really realizing what that context was. And I think here is an interesting analogy in archiving, and how archiving has often been done in the past was really about this way of generalization and standardization. And I think only since the 70s or so, we've come to see, well, actually, we need more voices within the archives. There's not one standard anymore. There is not the objective, which Geen, of course, also looks for. And I think what I'm trying to do now is to extrapolate in a way from that, and really look, well, okay, we've seen that, and practices are definitely evolving. But what would happen if we take the absurdity from another point of view and look at it really from the perspective of not anything goes, but really letting things happen, and also bringing people in where they are perhaps not expected, and see then, okay, well, what kind of new knowledge will that give us? And I think, to me, and again, I'm not an expert on Brecht at all, I think that's also where Brecht is really looking for in his absurdity of the theater. It's breaking that idea of the theater and see how the boundaries can actually be really productive rather than limiting.
Yes, and I mean, just again to quote your text, when you are talking about archiving, you're talking about it, of course, in two very specific modes in this text that you have contributed. But you are saying also that archiving turns into a process of co-learning and co-developing and thus co-archiving. And then in another quotation that I could read, you were also talking about that archives that are federated, and I mean, by federated, I think one can also clarify that they are non-state, non-bureaucratic, non-top-down, but again, through this process of co-archiving, a more bottom-up and a grassroots level initiative of collectivizing, that these kind of archives allows different levels of decentralization and interoperability in terms of network architectures and data circulation. And I found this very, very interesting and exciting also because I had found another piece of text where according to writers Martin Dodge, Rob Kitchen, and Chris Perkins in their text, introductory essay, Technologies of Mapping, which is part of a publication called The Map Reader, Theories of Mapping, Practice, and Cartographic Representation. They state, and I quote, technologies of cartographic production have often been explained through narratives of scientific progress. As a consequence, the history of cartography tends to be written as a history of technique, with an underlying assumption that rational decision-making leads to the adoption of improved technologies and updating institutional practices when they become available. And for me, looking at this quotation in the context of online archives and archives in cyberspace is also very interesting, where cyberspace is the preeminent terra incognita of the 21st century. And a wide range of maps and map-like visualizations have been produced to comprehend it. And in both applied and scholarly writing, the computerization of cartography is conjoined in progressive discourses of scientific advancement and increasing accuracy and depth of knowledge. And this fits with the long-running storyline of progress in cartography. And so art becomes science, florid designs become formal display, and the cartographer becomes an anonymous technician, and the word becomes the archive. And in this sense, this idea of how does archive and archive making, how is it conjoined with this idea of cartography as a very technical and technological tool is very interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is really interesting connection that you make, and I think indeed this idea of the cartography and lining that up with archiving as a system is to me really relevant, and in a way it is also something I think that Anne Geen is doing. And I think the interesting thing with archiving for me are usually not even the objects in an archive. You know, they can be really interesting and relevant. But what for me is really interesting in the process of archiving is the archival system as such, the record keeping system, but also the management system, but also the whole structure and everything around it. And that is also a certain systematics and a certain, it's not a cartography, but you could map it out quite clearly in a sort of model in a way. And I mean, yeah, this of course brings me to what Susanna has been doing with the wikis that she's been working on as well, where you can see how a structure is so important, how that medium in a way also forms what is collected in a way. And I think those are really interesting mechanisms.
Thank you for bringing to this topic. I really wanted to revisit the idea of federation, as you bring it forward, that and access. Now we are in the sources of this whole discussion. The whole. So maybe I'll give some background that I have worked a lot with a Wikimedia world, trying to envision how that linked system of knowledge could offer a platform for history writing from a more micro-historical perspective. But there is a certain limit of access, of accessibility, of inclusion in the projects. So, and then we come back to the idea that the encyclopedic knowledge is what is maintained there. And then we have all other domains, such as the museums, who maintain a certain selected collection of knowledge. And then there are so many things that fall outside these systems of, I don't know, networks of care maybe, that foster these knowledge spheres, and these areas in between need attention, and that might become possible if they can be more autonomous themselves, but still connect to these other bodies of knowledge, and that they can exchange is the world of maybe linked data, if we talk in technological terms. But then again, it also forms different, there is a need for different kinds of ecologies, as we are picking up the words from each other, that will make this possible. And then the roles of the artists and the archivist and the federatist, I don't know, what was it, federative artist, they I don't know, they maybe shift around. Well, so
just wanted to say quickly, there is a time for a 2 minutes comment if Annette, you want to react to this, and then we have a 5 minutes break.
Yeah, I think it's what really is. I think you're completely interesting what you say, and I think it's something that we can return to after the break at more length, I suppose. But it really reminds me of also something that the artist Lynn Hirschman-Leesman mentioned when she was interviewed by someone, that, well, how to find knowledge and where, where is the things that we need to know about the history, for example, and also in documentation and archival practices. And one of the things she also says is like, well, it's in the gaps. It's in the gaps where we can find that knowledge. And so it's not necessarily within the documents or in the records or in the objects, but it's in between. It's that sort of gray, messy area where I think the most interesting things are happening. So yeah, maybe that's something to consider after the break. That's a nice cliffhanger.
Okay, thank you. We will go now into the break, and we'll come back at 7:45 Helsinki time. Hello, we are back.
I think we're back. Yeah, good. Yeah. So welcome back to Annette and Susanna and Ali, and also everybody following on the stream. This is now the second part, which will last for another 30 minutes. And then we will stop for another 5-minute break. And then we can go into responses from audiences. Just again, a note that if you are following on YouTube, you can comment and contribute by posting comments into the YouTube comment box. And yes, I just wanted to pick up on this idea of, before you continue, and I think you're going to go back into a conversation around kind of commons and archiving, but I wanted to maybe ask if you could say a word or two, Annette, about what the idea behind an artist activist is, and what, an artist archivist is, and what the idea between a federative archivist is, just because this is something you have all been referring to, and it would be nice to think about with the audience. Okay, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, that's a good one. Can I say I just don't really know. It was something, I don't know why, but I think it was through the conversations that we had ongoing that it struck me. It's like, there's these two figures almost, and what if I actually named them? What would happen? So for me, there are certain abstract concepts as well as a sort of practical personalities. And I have to check my notes here, but in a way, for me, the federative archivist is the one that works from this idea of the federation, and is very much aware of the environment in which he or she works, and it's fully aware of the impossibility also of the completeness of things. It doesn't necessarily believe in the objectivity, and it's trying now to really organize all the data, the residents, the communities, the location, the times, the themes, the media, in a way that's going to be accessible for many. So there is this conflict also between how far can I still be subjective, but also generalize and standardize so that it becomes more accessible to others. The activist archivist, on the other hand, is more looking at, I lost my notes here, yeah. Is also similarly keen on providing access to the things that are collected, but is doing that in a more, you can say, like, how do you say, there's this beautiful English expression that I don't know, of course, at the moment, but it's more the looking for the transformation and looking at the transformation in whatever way possible. So it's less concerned in a way with the subtleties, with the nuance that might take place within social interactions that are not necessarily part of the project, but are more outside of the project and can influence the project in different ways. Let's see, what else can I say about it? I've got it, of course, beautifully written out, but I never really made like really defined definition, also on purpose, because I think that's not really the idea now, to say like, okay, you've got these two entities and we're gonna really define them. I mean, I think that goes against the whole goal of it. As Susanna, I think you, and Ali, I think you as well, kind of mentioned in different ways. It's like, well, it's tools to discuss things and see how these nuances actually can be made productive within this attempt to start an archive in a way. Yeah, I think that's all I think I can say about it at the moment. But it's interesting, I think, as well, because indeed there's probably more overlap than difference. So yeah.
I think there's even overlap in the wording and even in the descriptions. So I would even love to play a role game and try to limit myself to one or the other and see, you know, what are my boundaries, what am I supposed to learn more, and or whether this finding deficiencies in methods, whether they don't, for example, if let's say a federative, like thinking that we have different kinds of data here and other kinds of archives here, and we want to somehow bring them together. This is what I kind of see as being a federative approach. That what if this approach is completely neglecting some basic principles of working with people to write the kind of history that they want to have preserved? Then one has to find ways to go beyond those obstacles. So I'd like to be both.
Yes, I was also when I was reading the descriptions in the text, I was also thinking about the federative archivist as being someone who is more afflicted by the database fever, but also thinking that this idea of the database in itself is, as a backend to the archive, is something that has no inherent or latent narrative, that it is in itself an object or a set of objects that needs to be made sense of. And I think the federative model of working is also trying to then expand that sense making into a larger scale of multiple archives coming together to create a composite or a commons in itself. And also thinking about it from the perspective of when I was writing my thesis during my MA, and I had written that the thesis invites the reader to consider the archive as a narrative, a repository, a state tool, a fact, a fiction, both as a site and trope for artistic inquiry and art production, and defined the protagonist, the user, that was my word, as an artist, curator, archivist, a combination of historian, researcher, performer, participant, interventionist, collaborator, urban denizen, and spy. And this is, again, taking it back to Susanna when you talk about intelligence as espionage, that there are then these recurrent roles and iterative roles that the archivist in their many facets play. And I think this idea of these two distinct aspects of how an archivist may work is just so beautifully put out by you, Annette, that these are, in my head also, these are aspects of how an archiving process does take place today, and even as an artistic practice, to think about archival structure and of course to think about what knowledge and for whom, and that has a certain kind of political context, but how to make it accessible, how to make it commonable, and what does what does commons actually mean outside of outside of the idea of a state organized public space, as a kind of an anarchist archivist method of working. So here's another third iteration to it. But that these are multiple ways in which an archiving practice actually can take place. But this is maybe an over definition of it.
No, I think this indeed leads in a way to other topics that we'd like to discuss in a way as well. Is indeed about, well, how then, how to generate a commons through the archive, and is that possible? And could you tell us a little bit more about the project and the way you're working on at the moment and how you try and do that?
Susanna, do you want to do this, or should I?
I somehow have a feeling that it would be nicer if you would, and I would really love to have even Minna here commenting this. But please, you start.
Okay. Well, I think the first aspect of how this project really kind of started taking shape was in again, this understanding that Susanna and I had in terms of a certain kind of similarity in our practice of wanting to not really play the role of artists during this residency at MCALT, but more as individuals who could bring a certain kind of sense of resource building into the community, and looking at then the Central Park or Keskus Puisto as a site for making that happen, and trying to also work with various individuals, organizations, community actors in trying to develop a space, a hosting space for the already the years-long work that is already being done, whether in the context of activism work or ecological conservation work or protection of natural heritage, but also looking at it from a political perspective of the kind of relationships that the community of Maunula has with the city of Helsinki. And that's, for me at least, a very personal entry point, because the way I was introduced to Maunula was in the context of its history and its turbulent relationship with the city. And I really wanted to kind of work more with that. And so the whole process of actually building, again, this federative model of a composite of different archives that already exist or are in the process of becoming, giving a space, or, well, not really giving a space, but putting forward a proposal for all of these different materials and the different organizations that have very similar concerns but don't really communicate with each other. So allowing for a coming together of all of this as an ongoing practice. That was one of the first ideas that we really had. And I think for us, our hope is that it continues as a project that at some point of time becomes completely taken over by the community as their project, and we kind of continue as maybe some kind of support system, technical support system, but the material and the content is entirely theirs. And with MCALT, I think what we also did, and this was fabulous of them to have stepped up to this task. They have been our primary material collectors, also for me, because I don't speak Finnish, and a lot of the project is now in Finnish, with Finnish audio excerpts, interviews done with local residents. So a lot of that content gathering has been done primarily by Minna, Ida, and Kalle. And with Susanna and I, we have been working again with collaborators like Arun Ganesh, who is actually from Washington, and Palash Mukhopadhyay, who is in Helsinki, to develop this online interface, which we actually launched today in the afternoon. We had our first test launch, all combined into one. And I think we left to come and join this meeting, but there are still some people who are walking the park and listening to the audios as we speak.
I mean, I think one thing indeed, what kind of leads me to Susanna indeed is what you say indeed is that you've become this technical support system in a way, right? I mean, that could be a future role. Yeah, how do the physical, the people, the nature, and everything around it come together with the record management, with the technical side of things? And I think, Susanna, you can.
Sorry, there was a person leaving me a note, right? Well, can you formulate again the question? How does the role of technical support come together with the archivist role? Yes, somehow I have a feeling that, you know, like the world is full of localities, like the here's and me, the me, everyone, that there are focal points everywhere, and that should be that is how it should be. And then the role of the, I don't know, the magician of providing opportunities to create something around those focal points becomes such a universe of opportunities that I don't know, the magician, the facilitator cannot be everywhere. But then I think here we have the dilemma of the federative approach and the artist approach, maybe that can we go everywhere and give all, stay there? And I mean, are we the facilitators of those materials, or are we the facilitators of the environment? Because I don't think we can be everywhere all the time if we want that this would happen everywhere. But I think one has to sort of well, that there's the sad story of not being capable of doing it all. That we fall short of our capabilities in serving many localities. And I don't know exactly how to solve it. I think it's a question of scaling, as it would be in software development, that it becomes, well, it becomes a platform or platforms, or like opportunities or tools, methods, and that they become your own, that you don't have to be everywhere. Your role is maybe to be there and then go away, to allow for them to be adopted. I don't know exactly. I'm exploring, and I'm hoping to find ways in which I don't feel being incapable of providing the opportunities. Yeah.
I mean, a question that occurs to me indeed while you're talking, and also thinking about the practice that you do with the wiki documentaries, for example. How, I mean, very practically seen, how would you say that that it's a tool indeed to provide agency and to give openness to these processes.
Somehow I have a feeling that in this current stage, this is a project that I have done over a few years, which is a platform to pull together knowledge from data and from different sources, and currently primarily from Wikimedia platforms, and then opening, giving tools to be able to modify that data and bring other data, content, images, memories together in that. And then the key issue will be to be able to, let's say, integrate these other voices, other ways of archiving into that big data. And actually here again, we run into the challenge of the federative archivist, because there are structures in which knowledge is organized in these systems. And there are like very few common denominators between different systems. And actually, I think the whole idea of how systems communicate, that they find like a very limited number of common denominators and try to communicate through them. And so in fact, this becomes like reducing the breadth of information into, I don't know, exchangeable parts. And then it becomes, you know, like very simplistic sometimes. But unfortunately, there are things that, you know, I think organisms also, they are very simplistic. So when we, you know, maybe when we get rid of this like machinery kind of thinking and enter a kind of more organic kind of thinking, that how things take form on their own. We are not there yet, but I think then we might, you know, we might see very complex things based on very simple, like, ingredients. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. I might probably got carried away somewhere far away. I don't know.
No, I think this is exactly in a way where we started with this whole idea of Engin as well, to focus on those details. The art of noticing becomes really important and crucial, and can tell you something much wider and much bigger in a sense. I mean, I keep looking at the screen and seeing the three of us, and I can't help but notice, and I'm sure people who see this notice it as well, that we all have a landscape, a map in the background, but a very different one, and which I very much like in a sense as well. I mean, mine is actually a painting that my partner's mother did when she graduated from art school. And I think, Susanne, yours is more a graphic map of Helsinki, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I tell, this is very, just happen to have it already, but this is, this is the map of Central Park as designed in 1912.
And then you, Ali, what is in your background? What kind of landscape do we see there?
It's it's my books on conflict, on curating, and on archiving, with the image of this is a location in Bombay, which was actually the site of my first archival project when I didn't even know what archives were. So
that's very nice. I mean, I think these are all in a way very sort of human expressions in some sort of way, translated through media, either paint, photography, and cartography. And I think this kind of connects perhaps nicely to a question that I see on another screen on YouTube, where someone asks is, how do you make and share a commons, in this case an archive, with the more than human in mind? And indeed, I think for me personally, the archive is never just human. There's always other things, non-human, at stake. And often their stake is actually much larger than the human, but both from a practical as well as a philosophical point of view in a way. But how do you see it within your project of the Central Park Archives?
I mean, I think in many different ways. One being very direct, that well, one of the very direct ways is that one of the interpretations of non-human is machine. This kind of an idea of the internet and trying to actually replicate a certain kind of cartography of a real space or a physical space into an online space, and trying to see if those threads or dots of relationships actually come together in that kind of a spatial arrangement and a spatial experience. That's one. But another very direct way, and this is the structure, but another very direct way is that the subject of our archives primarily is, apart from the human stories, is the nature, is are the trees, are the allotment garden spaces, are the flora and the fauna, and how can they be preserved, and what is the work being done to preserve it. And in a way, it's also about then this kind of information, but beyond information, the knowledges that one generates into that kind of an aspect of furthering this kind of preservation work. But also maybe just to kind of sorry, just to take it further from what Susanna you were talking about and Annette, you were talking about this idea of focusing attention and paying attention. I think there is a larger phenomena at work here, which is also how to be move from what we now understand as an internet of things. We're already moving into another phenomena, which is an internet of awareness, where a lot of stories and news trends, likes on social media, a lot of this is now being transmitted all across the globe in varying degrees and capacities. And we're all becoming increasingly aware of each other's realities and situations. And this awareness actually generates another kind of being, which is in a very metaphysical sense, it is para-human or post-human also. And this awareness is also something that we are kind of dealing with in a very micro historical sense in the specific cartographical location of the Central Park. So it's almost like a template of what a networked awareness can mean. And I will stop now.
Thank you. I think we have a now break of 5 minutes. And then we come back with there's some comments and questions from the audience. Maybe we start from there. And let's see if Minna Tarkka from MCult can join us also. So we are back in 8:20 of Helsinki time. Hello, we are back. So thank you for the conversation. In this last session of 30 minutes, we were planning to have some comments from the audience that we have had already, which is a little bit, one which is already a little bit answered, but maybe it could be nice to come back to it. And then also Minna Tarkka, who was referred earlier in the conversation, is joining us. She's director of the MCALT, who has been producing this Central Park Archives project. So maybe if we first start with the comment which came from the YouTube stream or post it there, and then we can have maybe Minna commenting or asking questions for the contributors. So I'm just reading this question, which is from Josh Allen. How do we make and share a commons in this case? And so thank you for the conversation. In this last session of 30 minutes, we were planning to have some comments from the audience we have had already, which is a little one which
Sorry, can I interrupt? There's some feedback happening, so I wonder if they also had.
Minna, can you mute your earlier in the conversation stream and stop video?
And maybe you might have to turn the YouTube stream off as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will start again. So the question is from Josh Allen and Annette already, and this was a little bit addressed already, but I want to just repeat it. So if there's something still to say, how do we make and share a commons? In this case, an archive with more than human in mind, so that they might be seen as participating in the co-constitution of that commons rather than part of its material. Question comes via J.K. Gibson-Graham. What about non-human agency? So this was a little bit discussed already, but if Susanna, Ali, or Annette, you want to still respond.
I would like to, this is probably like also referring a little bit to the artificial intelligence discussion, that what kind of agency do we give artificial intelligence? And I would like to make a statement that I want that there will always be human agency over artificial intelligence agency, and that such thing will be controlled by our intentions rather than giving the formation of, I don't know, the knowledge spheres to an external intelligence. Well, we can discuss that. There may be other thoughts to that. And actually, this might also be dealt with a completely different level. What's the role of, for example, environment, and in that way, ecology, and what is the role of maybe computational, organic asset building, or like how do different processes other than human conscious actions create archives? I think that is also an important question, but the agency is a different thing. Yeah, okay.
Maybe I can also add to this, keeping in mind Joss's particular interest, that it's also that our aim was not to, well, that the archive is actually a locative archive, that it is situated in a real world space as an augmentation of that real world space, that it is entirely dependent on the Central Park yes, in terms of its source of material, but also that it is an augmentation of the physical landscape of the Central Park. And one of the main ways in which that kind of a relationship can be seen in the physical space is the relationship between the allotment gardeners vis-a-vis the way they are working with the environment, and not using it as a material, but as a kind of a collaboration between the natural resources and the natural space, the trees, the winds, the flying squirrels. It's part of a larger ecological network, which the archive is simply trying to provide a augmentation in the ways in which we access that relationship. So in that sense, the machine post-human is also trying to create a relationship between the natural non-human and human as collaborators. Maybe this answers the question in some way, but this is a longer conversation, so we will get back to it when we meet.
Nice. Maybe we can move on to some of the other questions. So I believe Jussi has a question, and I also have one, but we've been joined by Mina from MCULT, as Jussi introduced, and it would be really nice to hear from Mina, who is obviously very much embedded in this project as well, and has been working with Annette, so is kind of, I guess, the glue holding all this together. It would be nice now to bring her into the conversation. And Mina, do you have a question that you would like to bring in? Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody. Now you can hear me, I guess. It's been really nice to listen to all of you leaning back. And, now I want to join with maybe something. I'd like to first say that for us, really, the networks of care was like a really, the concept that Annette is currently thinking about was really an inspiration. And it felt like that this is what the commons really is, and that if that type of thing could happen with this archive project, that would be the ideal thing. And in his way, Ali referred to this. But how it inspired us was that we were actually thinking of the forest, this very unique urban forest in Helsinki, and how it's actually been, as we were said by the Maarolan Sanomat, the local newspaper editor. He said that well, the forest doesn't make headlines usually. It's kind of in the background of experience. And because we have been working in that neighborhood, we've noticed that it's a really like strong background to people's experience, but it's mostly there in the background. So one of the things we wanted to do was to bring it forward as an entity. And I don't know if that's somehow answering the idea of how to organize a non-human or build a non-human commons or archive. To bring it forward, but how we want to do it is by very many different voices. And we will include also different like visions or different affordances by different like this institutional visions and plans and like seeing like a state kind of visions. And then there's the very like citizen scientist vision of the people who are observing very closely, that are really like passionately following a certain species, such as the flying squirrel, for example. And how this species in the end is then a main actor, a main like savior agent of the activist network, because wherever the flying squirrel is, because it's a threatened species, then the area can be saved from building. So there are these really like complicated networks of things and how they cooperate. So that's maybe how I would describe it. And the networks of care, we were also thinking, because there are like very special ecosystems there as well, and very often the people they do have a relationship of care with those places. So that was a kind of starting hypothesis for our work. I think we are doing it, we are moving it still. Of course, things change on the way, but the idea was that we would have, we would invite hosts for each of these ecosystems, and that they would start hosting, co-hosting a certain area in the park, such as the stream or the meadow, and so on. Does anybody want to add?
Thank you. I could have a question, which is kind of for Annette and also for Ali and Susanna and Minna, who's been kind of in Maunula concretely. Because within this, as mentioned in the beginning, we've been now switching kind of thinking about within the frames programming. Last year, this ecologies of knowledge, and now thinking about who really has access to these different ways of knowing and different knowledges. So I'm kind of interested in relationship to maybe this federalist model of archiving of knowledge, and then very concretely on the Central Park archive project. I think this has been, I think your like my like kind of answer to my question has been already addressed, but I want to kind of bring it directly here. Is there who would really, how do you see who would benefit from this kind of ways of understanding knowing in relationship to commons, in relationship to archive as a federalist model, but also how it's implemented or how it's played out in this Maunula project? I'm just like asking very almost quite concretely to, like, is there some new groups of people who's been underrepresented in the producing of knowledge? Is there, yes. So is there really like, how do you see like who benefits from this kind of conceptualization, but also implication? Who wants to start?
Can we just put people on the spot? Maybe
maybe Annette can start, because Annette hasn't been commenting for a while.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about this idea of the federated archive, but then I'm also kind of repeating what Susanna and Ali have been mentioning in a way. What I think is interesting is that there is a collaborative effort, but it is not necessarily hinged on one person. That's the nice thing about the federative archive, is that there's an accumulation of shared ideas and shared urgencies, perhaps at a certain point, but that over time those urgencies can change, of course, and also the people can change. But the overarching sort of network in a way, or platform, still exists, and I think that's the nice thing about it, that you can come in and out, and that you find a system where you can actually also take care that these, not only the content is saved and shared, but also the knowledge of how things were done and how the process was taking place. And I think if you indeed refer to, okay, what was missing and or what is a sort of element or community that is falling outside. It's also, again, what Minna just mentioned. Indeed, it's like the ecology itself, and how all of a sudden this strange little creature, this squirrel, can all of a sudden, generate attention at a certain moment, and becomes really useful, and brings in this sort of marginalized position for another good as well, and that can repeat and change over time again. So these are not static sort of entities, but it's a very dynamic idea of how an archive unfolds in a way.
I think it's also been very interesting to notice that in bringing together different layers of information from completely different contexts, that we can see things that have been very difficult to see. We can juxtapose, we can have a view to like quite different things at the same time, and therefore there will be like heightened understanding, whether it be like city planning or local history or school kids. We were discussing with a taxi driver today that that he sees a specific value in children learning about their environment. So I think it's also a collaborative benefit from bringing knowledge together in commons, on the commons, because this is like a meadow. It's a commons as well. Yes, everyone, short answer.
And I'm also thinking about it from this a larger perspective of the kind of world that we're living in, that we are living in a knowledge-based society, where immaterial labor has a dominant form, and that the ability to communicate, to act autonomously, to produce knowledge are the requirements of being creative, creating and consuming knowledge. And that knowledge, once produced, has to be transmitted. And this transmission is perhaps what we are currently right now talking about and are concerned with. How does knowledge get transmitted in a way that it is accessible? And by accessible, one also means that it is produced and transmitted in forms that are understood, that it is transmitted efficiently. And I mean, even just to think about it from a technical point of view, that a near instantaneous peer-to-peer connection is the most efficient form. And so when we're talking about knowledge societies, we then have to be, it has to be constituted by knowledge communities. And so different communities with overlapping and sometimes conflicting knowledges will produce that knowledge society. And also thinking about it from the perspective that who is this knowledge for, who gets to produce it, who gets to transmit it, and who receives it. These are also very critical questions that are part of, in my understanding, this idea of the network of care. So care is also, then there is a critical component to that caring as well. And I forget. Edith Rogoff actually talks about it, that when knowledge is unframed, it is less grounded genealogically and can navigate forward rather than backwards. And she talks about the importance of free knowledge. And we see that. I was talking about the internet of awareness. And it is also that knowledge is being transmitted and shared freely. And that perhaps the future of knowledge and learning is for it to be free. And the model that we are also working on with the open source free platforms of knowledge transmission is perhaps with this idea of future forward thinking within the creation of networks of care. Jussi, back to you.
Minna, do you want to comment something quickly, or maybe we can take a question, Yvonne, your question here, and then that will be like a final.
Let's go to Mina first, and
Okay.
then we can end on mine. I feel like my question is non-answerable.
Okay. So Minna, do you want to respond?
Well, I actually wrote in the companion about agency, and we have been dealing with that in many ways actually, and a lot of the people in the neighborhood, they have really different backgrounds and ages and such, but maybe the most interesting thing is how we work together and how it's possible to build these collaborative projects in a way where commons can start growing, and that's what interests me here, and what in this project as well in the Central Park Archives, what we were in the end, we were trying to write a contract, or we did finish a contract in the end, but everything was so messy because it's a collaboration, there are technical components, etc. But what we then, the main thing that I think we included in the contract was that we will have a very rigid practice of attribution. And why this is important is that there has to be also shared ownership of the archive, and this is something that is usually forgotten. So there can be so many different contributions, small and big, including for example a system of categorization to one observation from the allotment garden. By the way, Annette, it all gets back to the allotment garden because that's where we had our walk today, and it was a lovely September evening. Yeah, and I guess that's why I use that word conceptuous as well that Annette referred to, because it was almost impossible to write a concept at this stage of collaboration building and technical and ideological whatever components. So it's kind of in a stage of becoming, still it is. But yeah, the attribution was something important. I don't know if this answers at all what you were talking, but to have this shared ownership, and it requires certain methods of writing down also who contributed what, and being very upfront with that.
Thanks, Mina. So I think we had to kind of round up, but I will share my question. I don't think it's not answerable, but I think it's maybe something that's done in practice and over time and through process. But it also takes us back directly into Annette's text. So there's a small section that I would just like to read, which is: how can a system that is based on absurdity be implemented into regular archiving? ? Moreover, when following archival absurdity, could such a method also become a way to restructure the world? Similar to how, by restructuring a world, archival practice can also sometimes have an effect that a world starts to behave like the archives that are maintained of it. And so my question, which is quite an open question and maybe just something to take away with us rather than something to respond directly to, is how can absurd archiving become more common practice? And with this, how can it become world making? So.
Can I briefly comment on this? I won't respond actually. But I think actually Susanna, Ali and Minna can respond to it because they did the walk today. And that to me is the archival absurdity in a sense, and in a good sense, in a positive sense. Then what I mentioned early on is indeed this absurdism that has several sides to it. And here I'm really looking for absurdity in the sense of the imaginary and how the imaginary indeed then leads to a different way of thinking. So I'm really curious actually to hear more about your walk as well.
Well, I think we might have to round up, but the wonderful thing is that this project is ongoing and is at the beginning of, well, I guess it's been going on for a long time, but it still has many more phases to come. And it's very nice that, Annette, your text is kind of a speculative starting point for the project and response to it, but it also can unfold in a lot more perhaps unexpected ways as well. Yeah. But I do want to keep us to time, and I feel like that question is a big question, so maybe it was unfair to ask. But hopefully there's possibility for you all to continue that conversation together. So just before we go, I just want to plug our upcoming events in this programme of online readings as part of the launch of Rehearsing Hospitalities Companion. Sorry, the other way around. I think we got it. So the next event in the series is on Friday, 2nd of October at 7 p.m. EEST. And this is readings with the contributor Amy Hammery and Marianne Savalampi and Telko Vatera. And then on Thursday, 8th of October at 7 p.m. again, we have readings with the contributors Denise Ferreira da Silva and also Estrida Jimenez. This last event is not live but pre-recorded due to time differences. And just a wee reminder on where to get copies of the publication. There's various links and information about this in the event description and also this YouTube description. So maybe I can just say thank you to everyone for joining us this evening, to Annette Dekker, to Ali Akbar Mehta and Susanna Ånäs, also to Mina Tarka, and of course to Ida Nassian, who was not here this evening but is part of the project as well, from MCult, and to their ongoing collaborations in the Rehearsing Hospitalities programme. Thank you to Iona for captioning this evening, Magic Fingers, and to Iris Somi, who was keeping it all running smooth for us behind the scenes. Last but not least, thank you to everyone who has been following on YouTube, and hope to see you on Friday 2nd for the next event in the series here on this YouTube channel. Okay, so we could just wave goodbye. Maybe Jussi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everyone, also all the all the viewers in the YouTube and all the participants here. Thanks a lot. We will see you next week, hopefully. Thank you.